If you're a guest with us this morning, again, we want to welcome you to Zion. We're on week 3 of a 4-week series on marriage called Pillow Talk, real conversations for real marriages. And we started a couple of weeks ago by unpacking the truth about the ultimate goal for marriage is oneness. That God's design, God's desire for every marriage is to ultimately be able to experience oneness inside of their relationship. And we define oneness as the merging of our bodies and souls and our spirits. And last week we talked about the merging of our physical bodies, and thank you all for praying for us. We got through that one. Today we're gonna talk about a different kind of oneness. Well, let me ask you a question, those of you who are married. How long into your marriage did it take for you to realize that everything wasn't going to be perfect? I mean, think about it. How long into your marriage did you realize that everything wasn't going to be perfect? Was it months? Was it weeks? Days? Hopefully it was a little bit more than hours, right? For some, the honeymoon phase was incredibly short. And I want to help you with something. Why is that honeymoon phase typically short? Well, I think it's because of the reality at some point in time in our marriage, we realize something. That we're bringing ourselves into the marriage. That we're a part of that marriage. And because of that, it's not going to be perfect. Hopefully we all recognize that we bring our own habits, bad habits, into a marriage. That we bring our own expectations, realistic or not, into marriage. And most of all, and what we want to talk about today is when we came into our marriages, we brought our words with us. We brought our words with us in our marriages. And today I want to equip you with some tools to think about communication inside of marriage. All right, that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to try to equip you with some tools that will hopefully help you when it comes to communication inside of marriages. Let's be honest. I think we've got a couple of slides up here. Ladies, most of the time, we need one of these to get our husbands to open up. Right? That's just true. How many women, you need one of those to get your husband to actually talk? Right? You can raise your hand. All right, good. Men, on the other hand, we need one of these sometimes to actually understand what our wife is actually saying. Come on now. Let's be honest. Come on, we're friends. I've earned the right to poke a little bit, I think. But let's be honest. Men and women tend to communicate much differently than each other. Is that fair? Am I telling a lie in church? No? Okay, good. So, and again, there are some exceptions, but some of us are much more of the land the plane communicators, right? You know what I mean by land the plane? You're the person who, when it comes to a conversation, just get to the facts, get to the point, land the plane, let's move on. Others are communicators who just enjoy the ride. They're not in a hurry. They process out loud. They like to tell the whole story. They like to go into details, right? Another way to say it is, some of us are just show me the baby communicators, while others are tell me the delivery story communicators. Are you tracking with me? Do you know what I'm saying? All right, and I'm not going to tell you which one typically lands on one, but we all know who's who in this scenario. Okay, so again, neither way of communicating is wrong, but if we can't recognize the differences in communication styles inside of our marriages, we're always going to struggle. I'm going to put up a slide now that talks about the 5 levels of communication. Some of you are familiar with this, but if you're not familiar with this, I would encourage you to take a picture of that or write it down real fast, because this is super helpful. People who are way smarter than me, who write books, have kind of determined that we communicate at different levels. And I want to show this to you real quickly. So the first level, the most shallow, basic level of communication is when we communicate in cliches. And so we'll just take the standard question that we typically ask or hear from our spouse: how was your day today? Cliche is simply saying, it was a day. Meaning that you're not sharing anything. You're not communicating anything. The degree of transparency in that kind of communication is zip, zero, none. You are not being transparent with the other person at all. The next level is the facts level. Hey, honey, how was your day today? You communicate facts. I had several meetings today. You're sharing there, but all you're sharing is what you know. I'm telling you what I know. Today, I had meetings. That's very little transparency. It's better than none, but it's still very little. The next level of communication is where you begin to share your opinion. How was your day today? My opinion, today, work was stressful. Now you've moved from sharing what you know to sharing what you think. Right? Do you see it's a little bit deeper? There's some transparency there because you've at least given your opinion about the day. Then we move down to the next level. This is the emotional, where you begin to share some emotions. How was your day today? Honey, I feel frustrated. Today was a frustrating day. Again, you're sharing a little bit more, not just what you know, and what you think, but now you're sharing how you feel. Today was a frustrating day. Much more transparency. That's you're good there. That's a pretty good place to be. But there's another level of communication that few people ever actually get to. And you're never going to get to this level of communication with everybody. I don't recommend it. You shouldn't be at a level 5 communication level with everybody. Not healthy. But you need to have a few people that you can communicate at this level with. And one of them should always be your spouse. Level 5 communication. How was your day? You know what, honey? To be honest with you, I really feel inadequate in this job. I really feel like there's just something in me that feels completely unable to do what I'm asked to do day in and day out. And what are you doing in that moment? You're not just sharing what you know, what you think, or what you feel, but in that moment, you're actually sharing who you are. Do you see the difference? Now, I'm not going to quiz you on that, but this past week when you came home in the evening and one spouse asked the other spouse, how was your day? What followed? What was the conversation like following a simple, important question that we should ask each other all the time? How was your day? Right? So again, where we're headed today is this truth. Healthy communication is the key to relational oneness in marriage. And if oneness is the target, and oneness is the goal, it's the merging of body, soul, and spirit, being one relationally is super important. And it's a process. It takes time. But the goal between husband and wife is always to be able to talk to each other at a level 5 place, a place of transparency, where we're able to share who we are. So what we're going to do today is we're going to do a little Bible study on communication. It's going to feel, I'll be honest with you, I was telling somebody earlier today what I'm going to share is going to feel a little bit more like we're at a marriage seminar than listening to a sermon. Because if you sat down and said, okay, I want to prepare a sermon on healthy biblical communication, you're not going to find a lengthy, discourse in one of the Gospels or in Paul's letters or, any place in the Psalms where you can say, okay, here are the 20 verses that we're going to study today. when you begin to think about communication and what we can learn from the scriptures, it's much more like breadcrumbs, that you go looking for breadcrumbs and you see something, you say, okay, that's helpful, that's helpful, that's helpful, that's helpful, and you put them all in a basket, and then you begin to see, okay, the Bible does say much about communication, but you kind of have to go looking for it. And a lot of where we're going to look at today, a lot of the verses that you're going to see are from the book of Proverbs, which has got a ton of truths about communication and other things. So just be prepared. We're going to try to put some things up on the screen. You can either take notes or take pictures, but here we go. I'm going to give you 7 things this morning that I think are helpful when it comes to communication in your marriage. All right, number 1, write this down. When it comes to healthy communication, choose the right time. Choose the right time. The book of Ecclesiastes says there is a time for everything, right? A time to dance and a time to mourn, a time to sow and a time to reap. You know that passage in Ecclesiastes 3. Well, it's true when it comes to talking with each other, choosing the right time. Proverbs 29:20 says, do you see a man or a woman who is hasty in their words? They're just quick to just talk. They just talk. Just comes to my mind, I got to say it. I think about it, it's got to come out. There is more hope for a fool than for him. Timing is important. It's everything in communication. It's the first rule, right? Talk at the right time. Because, and you probably have heard this somewhere before, you can say the right thing, but if you say it at the wrong time, all you're going to get is resistance and pushback. I mean, you can have a great thought, a great idea. You might have something important to share, something important that you want to talk about, but if you say it to the other person at the wrong time, it will fall on flat ears that don't hear it. Let me give you some examples. Bad timing. There's 30 seconds left in the game. The score is tied. Your team is driving down the field for a go-ahead, field goal. Probably not the best time for your spouse to come and sit down and start talking about financial concerns. Or, kid problems. Or, things that need to be done around the house. Fair? And that's a silly illustration, but you understand those things are important, right? Financial concerns, kid issues, things that need to be done around the house, but probably don't want to have that conversation with 30 seconds left on the clock. Score tied. Your team's about to win the game. Or it's been a long day. You had to work late. You come home. Boss has been mad at you. You had meetings, in the morning. You're overloaded with projects and pressure. Or maybe, it's a day where the kids have been sick. The dishwasher's broke. The laundry room is filled with clothes because you couldn't wash them because it broke. And the in-laws are coming over tomorrow. And it's just been one of those days. And at 11 o'clock at night, you just crawl into bed. You just want to crash. And your spouse leans over and says, honey, what do you think God wants to do through our family over the next 6 months? Can we talk? Probably not the best time. Should you talk about what you believe God wants you to do in your family over the next 6 months? Absolutely. But you get that, right? We understand that when we use absurd illustrations and examples, we understand that, yes, it's important to talk about things, especially weighty things, at the right time. So what's the solution? Well, be intentional about choosing the right time for those important conversations. Let me give you another one. When you think about having healthy, communication in your marriage, write this down. Think before you speak. Some of us need to write that down and, tattoo it on the back of our eyelids. Just think before you speak. Proverbs 16:23 still says, a wise man's heart guides his mouth. Right? It comes from the heart and then it comes out of our lips. Proverbs 15:28, the heart of the righteous, and I love this, the heart of the righteous ponders how to answer, but the mouth of the wicked pours out evil things. If you want to have what you have to say received well, think about it first. The better that you plan what you're going to say, the more receptive your spouse will tend to be. when it comes to conversations that you want to have or need to have, again, things that matter, things that are important, things that are weighty, please learn to not just shoot from the hip and speak off the cuff. Think before you speak. I think there are two things that you need to think about before you go to your spouse to have conversations that might take some time, that might call for some honest, transparent dialogue, right? I think there are two things that you need to plan. The first is this: plan your introduction. Plan your introduction, and that sounds silly, but think about it. There's something on your heart, there's something in your mind, there's something that's in your gut that you say, I really need to talk to him about this. I really need to talk to her about this. It makes sense to say to yourself, to have a pen and paper if needs be, and say, how am I going to bring this up? Not just when am I going to bring it up, but how am I going to bring it up? Plan out your introduction, and then plan out your illustration. How am I going to say this, or how am I going to talk about this subject in a way that connects with the other person? Again, how you introduce the difficult subject can make or break the communication. For example, you're burdened about the spending patterns inside of your home. Anybody disagree? I mean, we all agree that's important, right? Spending patterns in your home. There's not enough month left at the end of your money. And you see that. Probably don't want to sit down with your honey and say, hey, honey, my mom thinks that you're a wasteful spender. I was talking to my folks, and they're really concerned about that new fill in the blank that you bought. Probably not a good introduction. Or, you're concerned about maybe the respect level that you're feeling and sensing from your husband. Probably don't want to sit down with him and say, honey, why don't you treat me the way Joe treats his wife? Probably not a good introduction. Probably not a good introduction. Or maybe the house has not been, the way you perceive it ought to look. Probably don't want to tell your wife, this place has been so filthy lately, the roaches are begging for raid. Probably not going to win you any points, right? So again, think before you speak. Right timing? Is this the right time? Have I thought about it? Am I thinking about how I'm going to say it, when I'm going to say it, what I'm going to, how I'm going to illustrate this? But then something else that will help you. Let me just keep going a little bit deeper. When you speak, when you begin to talk, write this down, consider the other person's needs. Consider the other person's needs. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29 says, do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs. And again, we can't go fast on this one. This is a critical step in communication. No matter what the issue is, start with their needs, their perspective, their hurts, their goals, their interests. And again, I don't know where I learned this, but I learned this years ago that when it comes to communication, from a communicator standpoint, this is what I do for a living, so I try to listen and learn about communication. Here's what I learned a long time ago. The listener is always thinking, why should I listen? Why should I listen? How is this going to benefit me? As a communicator, I recognize whether you consciously or subconsciously are asking yourself those questions. That's what you're wondering. When I talk, you're saying, why should I listen? How is this going to benefit me? And so using that same principle, if you want to capture the attention of your spouse, tell them up front how what you're going to talk about can and will benefit them. And you're going to be in a much better position to get their attention. And why is this? I'm going to go a little bit, sociological on you. The reason that this is true is because God has placed at the base of your brain something that is called the reticular activating system. Anybody heard of that? You know what the reticular activating system is? Okay, it's the part of your brain that is a God-given filter. And he gives us this filter so that we don't have to consciously reply to every stimuli. If you had to consciously respond to every sight, to every sound, to every noise that comes into your brain, you'd go crazy. And so God in his grace and in his wisdom has placed in the back of your brain a filter that lets you filter things out so that you hear what is important. All right? Studies then have shown that 3 things get through our reticular activating system. All right, I'm going to have you write them down. The first one is things that threaten us. Things that threaten us. We're in a crowded room and there's a lot of people talking and somebody says, fire. Guess what you're going to hear? You're going to hear that. If somebody says gun, you're going to hear that. Things that threaten us get our attention. Things that are unique get our attention. Again, that's why the Super Bowl commercials are what they are. You notice the weirder, the freakier, the more unique they are, the more they tend to get our attention. It's because of the reticular activating system that God has put a filter in so that things that are unique or different will get our attention. And the third thing is the things that we value. And this is where communication is important. Things that we value, our needs, our goals, things that we believe are important, make it through the reticular activating system. We hear that. So, how does that help us in our marriage? Let me give you a couple of examples. Instead of saying to your spouse, why don't you ever help with the kids? Why don't you ever help with the kids? Try saying something like this. Hey, honey, I know that we both want our kids to grow up to be responsible adults. Guess what you've just done? Hopefully you've gotten through the reticular activating system because your spouse also values your kids growing up to be responsible adults. I know that we both want our kids to grow up to be responsible adults. Can we develop a plan to help make that reality together? I know you value this. That's why we need to talk about that. There's something that you see as important, and now we need to talk about how to make it a reality. Another example is instead of saying to your spouse, we have to quit spending so much stinking money. Stop it. Knock it off. Quit. Quit buying stuff from Amazon. Knock it off, right? Do some of us need to have that conversation? Of course, right? But if you want to get through the reticular activating system, you might want to say it like this. Hey, honey, let's sit down and talk about what we want to be able to enjoy when we retire. What do we want to be able to enjoy doing when we retire? And have that conversation. Because guess what? They're going to hopefully value that conversation. And then having had that conversation, you begin to reverse engineer it and begin to say, okay, if we're going to be able to enjoy traveling, if we're going to be able to enjoy a home in Florida, whatever it is, then you begin to say, okay, if we're going to be able to do that, you value this, then we need to have this conversation. We've got to have this conversation because of something that you value down the road. Again, you're thinking about the hurts, you're thinking about the needs, you're thinking about the values of the other person first. Communication flows when you show interest in their needs. Communication is blocked when all you care about is yourself. Start with their needs. Again, which then leads me to the next step in healthy communication, one that we often miss, and that's simply this: listen first. listen first. James 1:19 says, everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak. And in many marriages, it's just the reverse. There's usually at least one of the spouses, or maybe it's both spouses, who just want to get their point out. They're quick to speak and slow to listen. It's just the opposite of the way that it should be. I mean, we all know people, and maybe you are that people, who are so anxious to make a point that they have no idea what the other person says. I've been in conversations with people, and I've said something to them, and I can read it in their face that all they're thinking about is what they're going to say next. They're really not listening to you. They're listening for an opportunity to jump in and respond. That's not listening. That's not listening. And unfortunately, in the heat of difficult conversations, the heat of the battle sometimes in marriage, and we're going to talk about conflict more next week, that's all we're looking for, is we're looking for the other person to take a breath so that we can jump in and make our point, say what we think we need to say. And if you're the person who always listens just to be able to say what you want to say instead of listening to actually hear, quit. Knock it off. You're not helping. You're not helping your marriage. Learn to listen. It's insulting not to listen. We get into trouble if we speak before we listen. And one of the things that we tend to do is we make assumptions. And the longer that we're married, the easier it is for us to make assumptions. I mean, how many of you have had arguments with your spouse that started with, but I assumed this, or, but I thought you meant that, right? What happens is, because we're not actually listening, our preconceived ideas lead us to preconceived conclusions about what the other person means or thinks or feels, and that gets us into trouble. And again, the longer we're married, the easier it is for us to begin to assume what the other spouse means, thinks, feels, desires, wants, right? Again, be quick to listen, slow to speak. I know it takes effort. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but studies say that we only hear about 20% of everything that is said, which is pretty depressing for a pastor. When you walk out of here, you've only heard 20% of my words at best. All right, so again, this is not chapter and verse, right? But let me help you. If you want to learn to listen well, learn to listen with not just your ears, learn to listen with your eyes. Look at your spouse. Put your phone down. Turn off the TV. Shut everything out. Look at your spouse in the eyes and lean in. And a great listening tool is, once they've said something, look at them and say, tell me more. Because there's usually more. There's usually more. Tell me more. Is that all? Is there anything else? Right? Keep talking. I'm listening. You matter to me. I'm going to focus on you. Watch their body language. Watch your own body language. We say, right, actions speak louder than words, and that's true. The truth of the matter is that most of communication isn't verbal. Most of communication is our bodies. As a matter of fact, and this is, I think, the last stat I'm going to give you. Studies have shown that 7% of what we communicate is through our words, verbal. 43% of what you communicate is by the tone of your voice, how fast or how slow you speak, the rate, the volume, other audio qualities. For example, you can have a conversation with your spouse, and she says to you, "Honey, are you mad?" You can respond this way, "No, I'm not mad." Or you can respond, "No, I'm not mad." Or you can respond, "No, I'm not mad." I said the same thing every time, right? But what changed? My tone, my face, my body posture, right? Tone matters. How you say what you say makes a difference. Men, again, Be mindful of that. Men are not the only ones. Gals can, but men, we can be domineering. Be mindful. Learn to sit back. Learn to rest your eyes. Don't scowl. I struggle with this. I have been accused for years. And there's truth to this, right? Of being mad when I'm not mad because I raise my eyebrows when I talk. And it's something that I have to own. I have to be aware of. I use my hands. I get passionate. Trent, are you mad? No, I'm not mad. I'm just excited. I found out through DNA that I'm 50% Jewish. So it made all the sense when I found that out, right? I'm passionate. I talk with right? Again, the last one is 50% of what you communicate is by body language. 50% is body language. After you've listened, now you're ready to say your part. Only after you've listened are you ready to say your part. So how do you do it? You have something to say, something to communicate. You've done the first four, now what? Well, write this one down. Keep it positive. Keep things positive. Proverbs 16:21 says, the wise in heart are called discerning, and pleasant words promote instruction. Pleasant words. Think about Winnie the Pooh and Eeyore. Wah, wah, wah. Sometimes in our home, it's just that we bring this gray cloud into every conversation. Everything is just negative and gloom and rain, and it's bad and it's awful and we'll never, and it happens. For those of you who are a little bit younger, you know the phrase, you're what's the word I'm looking for? I should write it down. I wrote it down. Oh, that's it. You're an energy vampire. I forgot what it was. How many of you know that phrase, an energy vampire? You don't? There are people who just suck the energy out of the room when they walk in. They're energy vampires, right? And some of you might be an energy vampire. Don't do it now, but ask your spouse, am I an energy vampire? Do I just suck the life out of our relationship? Or do I breathe life into it? Energy vampires, don't do that. Don't be that, right? Learn to say things positively. Learn to be realistic and optimistic at the same time. And you can do both. You can be realistic and optimistic. As a matter of fact, let me just submit this to you. That's what it means to be Christians. That's what it means to have a Christian marriage. That's what it means to live by faith. You can be realistic about the problems. This has nothing to do with ignoring problems and just the power of positive thinking. We can be realistic about the problems and positive about it at the same time. Honey, this is a real issue that we need to talk through, but I believe that God can help us. I'm realistic. I recognize an issue, and it may be a difficult one, but I'm optimistic because I believe with God's help, all things are possible. That's the posture, that's the tone that we have to fight to maintain, because after all, we are Christians, and our marriages should reflect the reality of the hope that we have within us because of the resurrection of Jesus. There should be something distinctly different about how Christian marriages roll through the ups and downs of life. We're not perfect, but we have something that other marriages don't have. We have the gospel. We have the power of Christ within us. And again, when I talk about being positive, I'm reminded of this simple little quote that says this: we're never persuasive when we're abrasive. We're never persuasive when we're abrasive. It's a mark of maturity to maintain a positive posture, even in the middle of difficult seasons. Again, Trent, what if there's something we need to talk about that's really negative, that's really difficult, that's potentially life-changing for our family and our marriage? Well, here's what I would tell you. Share it up front. Put it on the table. Identify the problem in a factual, non-personal, non-derogatory way. Put it on the table. And then you quickly move to constructive mode, where you begin to talk about, what do we do about this? How do we address this? How do we fix this? What are some of the solutions? What do you think? See, there are a lot of marriages who are great at diagnosing problems and issues, We have this issue, we have this issue, we have this issue, we have that issue. And that's important to be able to diagnose and point out problems. Many fewer marriages, only great marriages, learn to find and fight for the right prescription for addressing with and dealing with the issues so that they can move toward greater health in their marriage. And that's what I want for you. That's what I want for you. I want you to be able to diagnose what's wrong and then in a realistic and optimistic way, move forward together. See, we've got to move beyond stating our case to stating our faith. Again, this is what it means to be Christians. This is what it means to have a Christian home, a Christian marriage. It's when we can look at each other in the eyes and know that, man, we've got a mountain in front of us. We know that we might have some late nights where we have to talk, that we may have to pick up the phone and call some friends to get in the middle of what's going on. We may need to call a counselor to say we need some family therapy. You may need a season that it's going to be difficult and you walk through a tunnel and you don't know what's on the other side, but you're shoulder to shoulder, arm in arm saying we're going to do this together. Because you can look at each other's eyes and say, we believe God can help us. I believe God can help us. I believe I can be different. I believe we can be different. I believe that we can resolve this issue. That's the hope that we have to maintain as followers of Jesus. I got two more. The sixth thing I want you to write down is to clarify your conclusions. Again, this is now super practical. Clarify your conclusions. Philippians 4:2 says, agree with each other in the Lord. Again, super practical here. But when you've had a major discussion about a key issue, whatever it is, right? Finances, kids, in-laws, careers. It's important that you get to this stage, and a lot of couples don't. What does it look like? Well, after you've talked it out, you together need to be able to summarize what you've said, recap it, restate it, what you've discussed, and then determine, okay, here's what we're going to do going forward. Be specific. Be specific. Unless you both know where you've been, where you're headed in the future, and what you can both expect from each other as a result of the conversation was worthless. It was worthless. If you can't restate to each other what was said, what was decided, and what we can expect from each other going forward, then the conversation meant nothing. Because somewhere down the road, if you haven't clarified the conclusions, it's going to come up again. And you're going to think to yourself, here we go again. Do we have to rehash this again? And the answer is yes, you're going to have to rehash it again because you never clarified conclusions the last time. And so here it comes again. This isn't a note for you, but you might want to write this down. Your conclusions might need to be put on paper. Like literally. You might need to put it on paper. And here's a little template for you that would go something like this. We agree that when it comes to blank, we are going to blank. You put it on paper. Trent, that sounds cold. That sounds contractual. No, that to me just sounds like good, healthy communication, making sure that we're on the same page. We agree that when it comes to money, we will, and then whatever it is. We agree that when it comes to our kids, we will, and then you put it on paper. We agree when it comes to how we spend our time, we will. When it comes to our in-laws, we will. We agree that when it comes to fill in the blank with whatever the issue is, and then put the conclusion. Put it away someplace. And then we don't use it to hold it over each other's heads, but we hold it to create some mutual accountability. And it comes up and down, and when it comes up again in the future, you can say, honey, the good news is we've already talked about this. We've already predetermined what we're going to do with our money because we talked about that 6 months ago. We already predetermined what we're going to say yes to when it comes to our kids and what we're going to say no to. Because remember, we talked about that a year ago. That was what we already decided we're going to do. So now the decision is easy. We've already pre-decided what to do in these situations. Have those kind of conversations about everything anytime it comes up. And then here's the last thing. End with encouraging words. End with encouraging words. When you wrap up the conversation, I'm reminded of Proverbs chapter 12, verse 25, which says, an anxious heart weighs a man down, but a kind word cheers him up. Always end on an up. Always end with something positive. And let me just give you 3 things that I think that when you are having difficult conversations, when you're trying to wrestle through things that require sit down, right time, listen first, all of the things we just talked about, I think it's important that you reaffirm 3 things. Number 1 is your commitment to the marriage. Because some of you have had really difficult conversations that maybe one spouse began to wonder, are they in it for the long haul? Is he really going to love me no matter what? Is she thinking about bolting? We need to, from time to time, just look each other in the eye and say, listen, I know that this is hard. I know that this is not an easy conversation, but you just need to know I love you. And I'm in this for better, for worse, till death do us part. You do not have to question that. This is a difficult moment. This is a difficult season, but I'm all in. Your spouse needs to hear that from time to time. And they also need to be reminded of your love. Hey, I love you no matter what. This is hard, but I love you. And then reaffirm your sense of optimism and that God is going to help you and that you're making progress. Hey, honey, just think about how much progress we've made over the last 6 months, over the last year, over the last 5 years. Think about how much of a better position we're in when it comes to our communication than when we first started out our marriage and we were just clueless. Be hopeful about the progress that you're making. Some of you are thinking, this is a lot. This is a lot to think about. I get it. Some of you are thinking, this is too much trouble. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. Please don't. Because if you'll put some of these things, if you put all these things into practice, it will be worth it. The prize is worth the price. The prize is worth the price. So as the worship team comes, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go home and identify some of the substitutes for communication in your marriage. What are the things that are in your marriage that keep you from being able to communicate well? For some, you might say it's our phones. For others, you might say it's our jobs. Or maybe it's one spouse's job and not the other's. You're always gone, you're never here. And it keeps us from being able to talk. Some of you might say it's our kids. And listen, you love your kids. I love your kids. We all love our kids. But sometimes if we're not careful, we get so myopically focused on our kids that we forget there's a marriage that's happening inside of our home. And the marriage came before kids, and the marriage is going to last after the kids are gone. So you need to prioritize the marriage. Identify some of those things. And then if you have the Pillow Talk devotional, work through that this week and go on the date night. Or if you can't go out, just pull up one evening and turn off the TV and say, hey, let's talk about communication. Let's have a conversation about the message on communication and look for some ways that we can improve. All right? Well, we're going to take communion together as well as we get ready to sing. If you're here today and you're a guest at Zion, we believe that Christ's bride, the church, is called to remember him. Way before we're called to remember a message, remember a song, remember a cookie, remember whatever. When we gather, and I'm glad for all of those things, but we're called to remember him and what Jesus has established for his church to do regularly so we never lose sight of him, of his sacrifice, of what he did for us, is through partaking in the Lord's Supper, the Lord's table, communion. Different churches call it different things. And so we do this at least twice a month, or try to do at least twice a month. And this is just an opportunity for us to individually slow down and remember Christ's sacrifice. But it's also a time for us to corporately be reminded that we are in this thing together. We're in this body of Christ. We're part of this church family together. And what unites us is not that we dot all of our I's the same and cross all of our T's the same. It's that we have union together because of the blood of Jesus. And so if you're here and you're a Christian, we invite you to participate in communion. The worship team is going to sing. And then what we'll do is I'll lead communion at the end of this song before we sing the last song. But you can come and just take the elements and then just stay in your seats or stay standing and sing. And then I'll come and we'll lead through the elements. Again, just trying to be mindful of folks and dietary stuff. We've had this request and have never done it, but we now have gluten-free communion. So if that has been something that has kept you from being able to participate in that, you're welcome. We can honor that today. So take a minute to pray, come and take the elements, and then after this song, I'll lead us through each element together. Father, we love you. Thank you for this day. Thank you for your goodness, your grace, and this opportunity now to respond. I pray again for families, for couples, that you would bless them and continue to grow them. And in these very practical, ways of improving communication, that it would become a rhythm, a routine embedded in just the way couples here at Zion just do life. Use this time again to draw us close to you. In Jesus' name, amen. Let's stand and sing together.